Welcome back, dear friend. Settle in now, wherever you are. Let the cushions cradle you. Let the blankets grow heavy and warm. And let the cares of the day drift, softly, somewhere just beyond the door. Tonight, we travel together, not far in miles, but far in time, back to a place of long grass and longer skies, to the quiet, golden hush of the American West, just before the sun has fully risen. Imagine, if you will, the whisper of a breeze moving across an ocean of grass. It rolls in slow, patient waves, silver-tipped and soft, all the way to a horizon so wide and low that the earth itself seems to lean back and breathe. Above, the sky is still pale, still half dreaming, brushed in gentle lavender and rose. A single star lingers, reluctant to leave, and a thin curl of smoke rises somewhere far off, from a campfire not yet fully out. The whole world is quiet. The whole world is waiting. This is the open range. This is the country of the cowboy. Long before there were fences, long before there were maps that truly knew this land, there was only this, grass and sky, river and stone, and the great slow turning of the seasons. The mountains in the distance wear their soft blue robes. The foothills lie folded in shadow, like sleeping animals breathing in the cool. Somewhere down below, a creek murmurs to itself in a language older than memory, moving over smooth stones that have heard 1,000 dawns and never tired of a single one. Listen. Can you hear it? The soft clop of a hoof, unhurried. The low nicker of a horse, still warm from sleep. The creak of leather as a saddle is lifted, gentle as a lullaby, onto a patient back. Out here, no one rushes the morning. The morning arrives on its own, in its own time, the way good things always do. A cowboy stirs beside the embers. His hat, wide-brimmed and softened by countless suns, rests on the ground beside him. His boots are close at hand. His bedroll, rolled against the chill of night, smells faintly of wood smoke and sage. He sits up slowly, the way all old travelers do, and looks out across the land. And the land looks back at him, not as a stranger, but as a long companion. The coffee pot, blackened from many fires, is nudged a little closer to the coals. A match flickers. A new curl of smoke climbs, thin and blue, into the lightning sky. There is no clock out here. There is no bell, no whistle, no voice calling anyone to hurry. There is only the fire, and the horses grazing at the picket line, and the great slow breath of the plains. Somewhere out in the herd, a cow lows, soft and sleepy, and another answers. The cattle have drifted together in the night, as cattle do, a dark and gentle island in the middle of all that grass. Their breath rises in little clouds. Their great calm eyes catch the first pale hint of the sun. They are in no hurry either. They have walked a long way to be here, and they will walk further still, but not yet. Not yet. In the east, the sky begins to warm. A thread of gold appears along the edge of the world, thin as a whisper. Then it spreads, slow and generous, like honey poured onto a waiting plate. The tops of the tallest grasses catch the light first, then the flanks of the horses, Then the weathered wooden spoke of the old Chuckwagon resting nearby. The shadows grow long, then shorter, then softer, and one by one the stars let go of the sky. And out here, in this hush before the day begins, it is easy to remember something the busy world so often forgets, that mornings can be slow, that silence is not empty, and that the land has its own gentle pace, and is happy to share it with anyone willing to sit still long enough to listen. So tonight, we are going to sit with them. We are going to ride with them in our own quiet way, through the long days of the cattle drive, through the small wonders of frontier life, through the firelit nights beneath more stars than you can count. We will go slowly. We will go kindly. There is no need to hurry. The coffee is warming. The horses are waking. The sun is drawing its first deep breath over the open range. Come, let us begin. Before the cowboy was a legend, he was a boy with dust on his boots, and not much else to his name. The war had ended. The great guns of the East had fallen silent, and across the mended country a strange restlessness took hold of young men who no longer knew what to do with their hands. Some had worn blue. Some had worn gray. Many had worn neither, only the patched cotton of farms that could no longer feed them. And so they drifted, one by one, toward the setting sun, toward Texas, toward Kansas, toward the rumor of wide country where a man might begin again with nothing but a saddle and a steady heart. They came from every place a road could leave behind. Some were freedmen, walking west out of the old cotton fields, carrying their freedom like a lantern they were still learning how to hold. On the trails, a man's skill with a rope and a horse spoke louder than the color of his skin, and many of them found, for the first time, a wage paid plainly into an open palm. By the firelight of 1,000 camps, their songs rose into the night, low, unhurried songs, older than the country itself, and the cattle, hearing them, would settle like children soothed. Some were Mexican vaqueros, riders whose fathers had tended herds beneath the wide skies of the South long before any border crossed the grass. From them the cowboy learned nearly everything he knew. The loop of the lariat, the cut of the wide hat that turned the sun aside, the patient art of reading a steer's mood from the flick of an ear. Even the very word buckaroo was only an English tongue trying politely to say vaquero. The cowboy did not invent his trade. He inherited it, soft-spoken and sun-worn, from men who had ridden these ranges under a different flag. Some were young drifters, scarcely done being boys, farm sons with patched trousers, orphans from river towns, runaways who had stared too long at the blue edge of the horizon. They arrived at the great stock pens with empty pockets and empty stomachs, and an older hand would look them over once, sigh, and toss them a blanket. Sock thee up before the rooster, asterisk, he might say, and mind the roan. That was the whole of their welcome. And then the learning began. A boy learned first how to sit a horse, not the way a town rider sits, upright and proud, but the way a cowboy sits, easy in the hips, loose in the shoulders, swaying the way a reed sways in a river. He learned that a good horse was a partnership, not a possession. He learned the names of his mounts, for every man in an outfit was given a string, 6, 8, 10 horses, each for a different task, a different hour of the day. There was the gentle one for the long morning miles. There was the quick one for cutting a stray from the herd. There was a steady one for the creek crossings, who would swim when asked, and not a moment sooner. He learned to throw a rope. That was a trial all its own. The loop wobbled, the loop sagged, the loop fell at his own feet like a shy dog. He learned to read the sky. A certain thinness to the clouds meant hail by evening. A certain stillness in the grasshoppers meant a wind was walking toward him from far away. He learned that coffee should be strong enough to float a horseshoe, and that beans, cooked slow, could feed a man through any hardship the prairie might arrange. And he learned to listen to the creak of the saddle, to the low, patient breathing of 1,000 cattle bedded down on open grass, to the voices of the older hands around the fire, telling stories that were half remembering and half dreaming, until the telling and the dreaming became one. This was the making of a cowboy, not a ceremony, not a day, a slow, weathering thing, like stone worn smooth by water. By the time a season had passed, the boy who had come west with nothing would have a rope that answered his wrist, a horse that answered his knee, and a quiet in his chest that answered the quiet of the land. He was not yet a legend. He was only, at last, at home. And so it is to Texas we go now, southward, where the land softens into brushland and the sky grows wide as a slow breath. The spring here does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives with a warming of the red earth, with the first pale green on the mesquite, with the small white flowers of the prickly pear opening like lanterns lit for something yet to come. And what is coming, gentle traveler, is the roundup, the great and patient gathering of the herd. Long before the sun has fully cleared the hills, the camp begins to stir. A cook kneels by the embers of last night's fire, coaxing them back to life with a careful breath, feeding them a twist of dry grass until the small flame stretches and yawns. Coffee goes on to boil. The smell of it drifts through the brush, dark and bitter and kind, and one by one the riders rise from their blankets, their hats pulled low, their boots pulled on, their words few. There is a pleasant hush over everything, as if the day itself is still half dreaming. The horses wait in the rope corral, warm-flanked, steaming a little in the cool dawn air. Each cowboy steps in among them and chooses his mount for the morning, slipping a bridle over a familiar head, feeling along a familiar shoulder. There is no hurry in this. It is the quiet handshake of two partners about to share a long day's work. The horse blows softly through his nose. The rider rests a moment with his forehead to the warm neck. And then, with the easy creak of saddle leather, they are ready. Out they ride, fanning across the country in a loose, slow wheel, riding into the thick, low tangle of brush where the longhorn cattle have scattered through the winter. These cattle are not the gentle dairy cows of green pastures. They are long of horn and hard of hoof, the color of old copper and smoke and cream, half wild as the land that raised them. They know how to vanish into a thicket without a sound. They know how to slip along a dry wash like shadows. But the cowboy knows them in return. He has learned the places they love, the shaded draws, the seeped springs, the low mottes of live oak where they drowse in the heat. He rides patiently, calling in a soft musical way, sometimes whistling, sometimes humming a tune with no words. The horse under him knows the work as well as he does. When a longhorn breaks from cover, the horse is already turning, already leaning, already bringing the animal back without needing to be asked. It is a conversation held not in speech but in weight and balance, in a shift of the knee, in the lightest touch of the rein. All through the warming morning, the herd begins to gather. Ones and twos come drifting out of the brush and join larger groups on the open flats. Dust rises, soft and golden, and the air fills with the lowing of cattle calling to one another. Calves trot close beside their mothers. Old cows, with wise faces, take the lead. By midday there are hundreds, and by afternoon there are thousands. A great slow river of horn and hide moving gently across the plain. Then comes the branding, done near the cook's fire, where the irons glow a sleepy red. The work is careful and quick, each calf tipped kindly to the grass, marked with the ranch's sign, and set back up to shake itself and go trotting off to its mother. The brand is more than ownership. It is a promise. It says, wherever you wander, we will know you. Wherever you are lost, we will come for you. And then the calf is gone, bawling, and its mother is answering, and the world returns to its slow turning. As evening settles, the riders come in one by one. Their shirts are dark with sweat, their faces lined with dust, but their eyes are quiet. They unsaddle their horses, rub them down with handfuls of grass, and turn them loose into the remuda to roll in the cool dirt and drink long at the trough. The horse that carried you through the day remembers everything, and you remember everything about him, and there is a bond forming now, deeper than friendship, quieter than words. Tonight the herd is bedded on a wide flat, under a sky so full of stars, it seems to lean down close. Somewhere a rider sings low to keep the cattle calm. Tomorrow, and for many tomorrows after, this gathered herd will begin its long and famous journey north. But for now, there is only the fire, the song, and the gentle breathing of 1,000 resting animals in the dark. Morning comes slowly to the plains, the way it always has. A pale band of gold lifts itself along the eastern edge of the world, and the stars, one by one, close their eyes and slip away. The fire has burned down to soft red coals. The men stir in their blankets, and somewhere, a coffee pot begins to whisper over fresh flame. The cattle wake the way a great river wakes, in slow stretches, in patient breaths, with a quiet shuffling of 1,000 hooves against the dew-damp grass. No one hurries them. No one could. This is the first morning of many, and the trail ahead is long. The cowboys rise into the hush. They pull on their boots, tighten their belts, settle their hats low against the dawn. They speak in the low, easy tones of men who have known each other through long seasons, men who understand that words, out here, should be few and kind. Saddles creak gently as they are lifted onto the backs of horses. Bits chime softly like tiny bells. By the time the sun clears the horizon, the herd has begun to move. It is a sight as old as the West itself. A sea of horns and hides flowing northward through the tall grass, a slow tide of red and brown and dust gray, drifting under an enormous sky. The lead steers, those wise old animals chosen for their calm temperaments, walk at the front with the steady certainty of captains. Behind them, the great body of the herd follows, mothers and young bulls, and the countless nameless cattle who have spent their lives on open range and know in some deep animal way that this walk is simply the next thing. The trail boss rides at the point, his horse picking its way through prairie that rolls on, unbroken save for distant groves of cottonwood and the silver thread of some winding creek. He watches the land the way a sailor watches the sea. He knows where water will rise from the earth. He knows where the ground will soften into mud. He knows, too, how to read the sky, which today is a gentle blue streaked with the thinnest of clouds. On either side of the herd ride the swingmen, keeping the edges shaped, turning back any steer who wanders. Behind them come the flank riders, and behind the flank riders come the drag men, the youngest, often, or the newest to the work, who ride in the dust of the whole great procession, coughing softly into their bandanas, earning the trust of those ahead. And somewhere apart, traveling along a parallel path, rolls the Chuckwagon. Its cook, a grizzled man with a kind voice and a sharp wit, drives the mules forward with the ease of long practice. Pots and pans sway gently from their hooks, clinking the small music of their own. Ahead of him, the wrangler keeps the spare horses, the remuda, moving in a loose and trusting cloud. The miles unfold like pages. There is a rhythm to it, a slow heartbeat the whole trail seems to share. The soft thud of hooves, the occasional low of a cow calling to her calf, the breath of wind through prairie grass, a meadowlark lifting its bright voice from somewhere unseen, the creak of leather, the whisper of a tail flicking at flies. Each sound folds into the next, and the day itself becomes a kind of lullaby. At noon, they pause near a shallow creek. The cattle drink and graze. The men dismount for a short time, stretching stiff legs, accepting tin cups of coffee and thick slices of salt pork between hard bread. They do not linger. The sun is still climbing. The land is still waiting. By afternoon they are moving again, and the shadows of the herd stretch long beside them. A cowboy at the flank hums an old tune, something his mother may have sung, something perhaps older than memory itself. The cattle, soothed by the sound, walk on. 10 miles is a good day. 12 miles is a fine one. 15 is plenty. The trail is not a race, but a long, slow conversation between man and beast and earth. And when at last the sun begins to lean toward the west and turn the grasses a soft amber gold, the trail boss raises a gentle hand, and the herd eases to a stop in a wide bend of grassy bottom land where the creek curls and the cottonwoods whisper. The cattle lower their great heads. The horses breathe deep. The men dismount, and the first day of the long journey north settles quietly into the keeping of the evening. And while the dust of that first day drifts slowly back to the earth, another small light begins to gather at the edge of the camp. It is not the sun, which is now only a soft copper line along the western grass. It is not the stars, which are just beginning to prick their way through the deep blue overhead. It is the fire at the Chuckwagon, and around it, the heart of the cowboy's evening is quietly taking shape. The Chuckwagon sits where the cook has chosen to place it, with the canvas tilted just so against the breeze. It is a humble thing, really, a wagon box with a hinged lid at the back that folds down into a work table, its shelves and drawers holding all the small treasures of the trail. Flour and coffee, salt and sugar, beans in a sack tied twice for safety, a tin of sourdough starter kept close like a living creature, warm against the cook's bedroll by night, stirred and spoken to by morning. Every ranch outfit has its own wagon, and every wagon has its own cook, and every cook has his own quiet way of making a camp feel like home. He is often an older hand, the Chuckwagon cook, a man whose riding days have gentled into a slower, steadier work. He is called the cookie, or the old woman, or sometimes simply cook, and the younger riders treat him with the sort of careful respect that comes from knowing who holds the coffee pot. He wakes before anyone else, when the stars are still bright and the prairie is silver with dew. He builds his fire from mesquite or buffalo chips, whatever the land has offered that day, and he sets the coffee to boil in a blackened pot that has seen 1,000 mornings. By the time the men ride in, the smell of that coffee is already on the evening air. It is a deep, toasted smell, strong enough to find a tired rider from a quarter-mile off, and there is no other scent on earth quite like it mingled with sage and smoke and the cooling grass. The cook has biscuits rising in the Dutch oven, golden and soft beneath a lid heaped with coals. He has beans simmering low, thick and slow with salt pork and a little molasses, their steam rising in slow curls that seem almost to hum. And if the day has been kind, there may be a slab of beef laid across the iron, hissing gentle over the embers. One by one, the men come in from their horses. They unsaddle in that careful, unhurried way that tired hands learn, laying their gear in a neat half-circle. They wash, if water can be spared, splashing a little from the bucket across sunburned faces and the backs of their necks. They stretch. They sigh. They shake the trail dust from their hats and set them, crowns down along the wagon tongue, for a cowboy's hat, it is said, should never be placed upside right upon the ground. Then they gather near the fire with tin plates balanced on their knees, and the talk begins. It is never hurried. It is never loud. It is the slow, low murmur of men who have spent a day in the saddle and have nothing to prove to one another. Someone tells of a longhorn that tried to turn back at the river. Someone else remembers a storm from last year and a camp near a cottonwood that bent but never broke. A younger rider, still shy, listens more than he speaks, and the cook, moving among them with the coffee pot, refills their cups without a word. The stars come out in their full number. The fire sinks to a bed of glowing orange, and the coffee grows strong in its pot, and the biscuits, split open, soak up the sweet dark gravy of the beans. There is laughter sometimes, soft and low. There is a harmonica, maybe, played with no particular hurry, its notes drifting out across the open range until they seem to join the wind itself. And if you listen very closely, beneath it all, you can hear the cattle settling down for the night, a long, low sound like a great slow breath let out across the grass. You can hear a coyote singing, far off on some distant rise. You can hear the creak of a saddle as a rider turns in for sleep, and the quiet clink of a tin cup set upon the wagon board. This is the Chuckwagon hour. This is the simple comfort that made each long day bearable. A fire, a meal, a few kind words, and the wide and patient night spreading its dark wing above them all. The fire has burned down now to a nest of soft red coals, glowing like sleeping embers of the sun itself, and the camp has grown quiet in the way that only a prairie camp can grow quiet. One by one the men have drawn their bedrolls close, tucking their hats beneath their heads for pillows, pulling their blankets up against the cool that rises from the ground as the stars come out. Their boots stand together near the wagon, leaning on one another like old friends. A coffee pot sits at the edge of the coals, patient, half forgotten, still warm. Above them, the sky has opened. It has opened the way a great book opens, slow and without sound, revealing page after page of quiet wonder. There are more stars here than a person raised in towns could ever imagine. Rivers of them, drifts of them, whole silvered fields of them scattered across the black velvet of the night. The Milky Way pours itself from one horizon to the other, like cream spilled across a dark table, and the old constellations hang low and friendly, close enough it seems to reach up and touch. The herd lies bedded down in a loose, breathing circle on the grass. 1,000 cattle, settled now, their great bodies warm against the earth. You can hear them if you listen, the slow shift of a shoulder, the gentle blow of a nostril, the soft creak of horn against horn as one shifts in its sleep. They have eaten their fill. They have walked their miles. They are dreaming whatever it is that cattle dream, there beneath the wide and merciful sky. And out along the edge of them, a lone rider moves. He is the night herder, and his work is the gentlest work of the whole drive. He keeps his horse at a slow, easy walk, tracing a quiet circle around the sleeping herd, and as he rides, he sings. Not loudly, not for anyone but the cattle and himself. Just a low, murmuring sort of tune, an old lullaby perhaps, remembered from a boyhood long behind him, or a hymn his mother used to hum while she worked. The sound of his voice drifts across the grass like the sound of wind through tall wheat, and the cattle know it, and they are calmed by it, and they sleep. For this is the great secret of the night watch, that a sudden silence can startle a herd, but a steady human sound can soothe them through the darkest hours. So he sings. He hums. He speaks soft nonsense to his horse. He is a small, warm voice moving slowly through a vast and starlit world, and he is keeping 1,000 gentle giants safe in their dreams. Far off, a coyote calls, a thin silver thread of sound unspooling across the hills. Another answers. Then quiet again. The prairie listens. The prairie always listens. A breeze moves through the grass, and the grass bends and whispers back. And somewhere a night bird passes overhead on soft, unseen wings. The rider lifts his eyes to the stars. He knows them the way a sailor knows them, though he has never seen the sea. He knows the plow and the North Star and the slow wheel of the dipper around the pole. He knows how the night turns, how one constellation rises while another sets, how the whole glittering dome moves above him as surely and silently as the hands of a clock. By the stars he can tell the hour. By the stars he will know when to wake the next rider, gently, with a touch on the shoulder, and trade the long reins of the night. For now, though, he has the world to himself. He has the breathing herd, and the patient horse beneath him, and the scent of sage and dust and dew-soft grass. He has the coals of the campfire glowing far away, a small red flower in the middle of all this blue-black dark. He has the Milky Way above him, and the coyotes far off, and the slow, kind weight of his own tiredness settling into his shoulders. And he is not lonely. Not really. A man learns out here that the night is full of company, of cattle and horses and stars and wind, of the old song still coming up out of his own throat, of the memory of everyone he has ever loved. The prairie is wide, but it holds him. The sky is vast, but it leans down close. So he rides on, humming, circling, watching. And the herd sleeps. And the camp sleeps. And the great quiet wheel of the heavens turns slowly, slowly above the sleeping world. But not every night was such a gentle one. There were other nights and other days, and the old trail remembered them all, folding them quietly into its long green silence. Sometimes, far off on the western rim of the sky, a cloud would appear no larger than a man's hand. The cowboys would see it at supper, and they would not say much. They would only glance at one another, and glance at the herd, and finish their coffee a little more slowly than before. For they knew the plains, and they knew the summer, and they knew what that small cloud could become. By dusk it would have grown into a great purple mountain, lit from within by a soft and silent flickering, as though some quiet lantern had been hung inside it. The air would turn heavy and sweet. The grass would lie very still. And the cattle, sensing what was coming, would shift and murmur and turn their great slow faces toward the dark. Then the thunder would come. Not all at once, it never came all at once, but rolling in from a long way off, like a wagon crossing a wooden bridge in another country. And the rain would follow, warm and drenching, and the riders would pull their slickers close and circle the herd, singing, always singing. For a cowboy's voice, soft and low in the wet dark, was the oldest medicine on the trail. It told the cattle, "You are not alone." It told them, "The world is still here." It told them, "Rest, rest, the storm will pass." And sometimes, on the worst nights, the cattle would rise anyway. A flash too near, a branch broken, a startled calf, and in an instant the whole great sleeping herd would be on its feet and running, a river of horns and hooves pouring through the dark. The old hands called it a stampede, though the word is too sharp for what it truly was. It was more like a tide, a long, dark tide of frightened animals, and the riders would gallop beside it, turning it gently, gently, easing the leaders into a wider and wider curve, until at last the tide became a circle, and the circle slowed, and the herd, breathing hard, remembered that the night was only the night, and the grass was only the grass, and the men were still singing. By dawn they would be gathered again. A few strays in the brush, a hat lost somewhere in the dark, and the trail boss, watching the sun come up pink and patient over the wet prairie, would nod once, and that would be the end of it. On they would go. Then there were the rivers. The great rivers of the plains lay across the trail like sleeping serpents. The Red, the Arkansas, the Canadian, the Cimarron. In dry years, a cowboy could cross them almost without wetting his boots. But in wet years, when the snows of far mountains came down all at once, the rivers ran high and brown and swift, carrying whole uprooted trees along like twigs. A crossing was a careful thing. The point rider would go first, coaxing his horse into the current, and the lead steers would follow, and behind them the whole long herd would come, swimming, their broad backs shining like wet stones in the sun. The men would ride alongside, whistling softly, keeping the line true. And when at last the leaders touched bottom on the far shore and climbed, dripping onto the grass, there would be a small cheer. Not loud, never loud, for cowboys were quiet men, but a warm, tired, grateful sound, passed from rider to rider like a cup of coffee on a cold morning. All of this the trail remembered. The storms and the stampedes and the wide brown rivers, the wet saddles drying by the fire, the lost hats, the long, patient songs sung into the rain. It remembered them not as hardships, exactly, but as part of itself, the way a mountain remembers its snows or an old cottonwood remembers its seasons. For the land was never cruel, only honest. It gave grass and water, and it gave wind and thunder, and it asked of those who crossed it only that they meet it plainly, with patience and with care. And the cowboys, bending their heads to the rain, or leaning into the river's cold embrace, or riding slow circles through the shaken dark, met it so. And when the sky cleared, as it always did, and the sun came back warm and yellow over the washed green world, they would ride on, quieter than before, their slickers steaming softly, the herd moving easy beside them, the trail unrolling ahead like a long, kind promise. And so the days gathered themselves, one after another, the way beads gather on a string, each one shaped a little by the weather and the country, each one a little the same and a little different, until at last there came a morning when the air itself seemed to change. It came as a softness on the wind, a faint smell of wood smoke that was not their own, the far-off clatter of something iron striking something iron. A bell, perhaps, heard once and then not again, the way a dream is heard. The older hands lifted their chins and smiled small, knowing smiles, and the younger ones looked at them and then at the horizon and felt their hearts turn over gently in their chests, the way a sleeping child turns in a warm bed. The town lay ahead, a Kansas cow town, small and plain and waiting, set down on the flat green like a handful of square wooden boxes left by a kind giant. Abilene, perhaps, with its long main street running straight as a furrow. Or Dodge City, farther on, where the rails came shining out of the east. Whatever its name, it was the place the trail had been leading them to all along, and they had only just now remembered it fully. They came in slow. There was no hurry left in them. The herd had walked 1,000 miles and more, and the men had walked beside the herd, and neither had any use for haste now. The dust rose up around the hooves in a soft, pale cloud, and the cloud drifted along with them, gentle as breath on a cold morning, announcing their coming to the town long before they arrived. And the town heard, and the town looked out, and the town smiled its worn wooden smile. There was a railhead at the edge of things, a line of stock pins, as long as a held note, the rails themselves lying silver and patient in the sun. There were clapboard buildings leaning companionably, shoulder to shoulder along the main street, their false fronts painted in the faded reds and soft yellows of old summer afternoons. There was a livery barn with its wide doors open, and a general store with a porch where an old dog slept, and a hotel whose curtains moved slow in the window like someone breathing. And there was the sound. Oh, the sound of a town, after all those weeks of only the wind and the hooves and the low call of cattle in the dark. A piano somewhere, playing something simple and a little out of tune, the notes wandering out into the street and lying down gently in the dust. A blacksmith's hammer, keeping its patient time. Voices. Women's voices calling across a yard. Children laughing, that sound that is the same in every country and every century, silver and small and bright. The drovers rode in slow down the main street, dust thick on their hats and their sleeves and the creases around their eyes, and the townspeople came out to watch them pass, as they always did, as they had done for every trail outfit that had ever come in. There was a kindness in that watching, a recognition. These men had done a long and difficult thing, and the town knew it, and the town honored it with its quiet looking. At the pens, the cattle were sorted and counted, and turned loose into their waiting squares, and the great long weight of the drive lifted at last from the shoulders of the men. They sat their horses a moment, simply sat, and looked at what they had brought, and let it be done. And then one of them would laugh, soft and surprised, the way a man laughs when he wakes from a long dream, and another would shake his head slow, and the trail boss would count out the wages into their waiting hands, coin by coin, the silver catching the sun. There would be a bath later, a real bed, a plate of something hot that was not beans or bacon, a barber's chair with its warm towel laid across a tired face. These small kindnesses would come in their turn, gentle as falling snow. But for now, just the standing in the street in the late golden light. Just the smell of wood smoke and supper. Just the knowing that the trail was behind them, and the herd was safe, and the long green miles had held them all the way home. A tired pride settled over them, warm as a blanket, and the town's soft lamps began one by one to glow. From those soft town lamps, let us drift a little way outward, past the last picket fence, past the chapel with its white steeple and the creek that murmurs beneath the little wooden bridge. Let us follow a quiet wagon road up into the rolling country, where the grass rises and falls like a slow green sea, and where, tucked into the fold of a hill, a ranch house waits beneath a stand of old cottonwoods. This was the other life of the cowboy. Not the thundering weeks of the drive, but the long, slow seasons between. Here the work was steady and close to home. The mornings began before the sun, with the clink of a tin cup, the hiss of coffee on a cast-iron stove, and the soft creak of boots finding their shape again on the bunkhouse floor. A lamp would burn low by the window, casting its honeyed glow across rough walls hung with bridles, coiled rope, a battered hat or two, and a photograph of someone's sweetheart far away. Out in the corral, horses stirred in the dim blue of early light. Their breath rose in slow plumes, mingling with the mist that crept along the ground. A young hand might come out to mend a halter, murmuring quiet words to a colt still learning the feel of a hand upon its neck. Breaking horses was patient work, not a battle but a long conversation, a gentling, a listening, days and weeks of small kindnesses until trust settled between man and animal like dew settles on morning grass. Farther out, the fences called. Mile upon mile of cedar post and wire ran across the grasslands, and always, somewhere, a wire had loosened, a post had leaned, a gate had dropped. So a rider would saddle up with a coil of wire, a pair of pliers, and a canteen, and set out along the line. The day would open around him, wide and blue. He would stop at a broken span, tighten the strand, tamp the earth around a post, and stand a moment with the wind in his shirt and the hawks wheeling slow and easy overhead. It was simple work, and there was a comfort in its simplicity, in knowing that by nightfall, one more mile of the home place would stand straight and true. At midday, the ranch gathered. Beneath the cottonwoods, a long plank table had been set by the woman of the house, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hair gathered soft beneath a kerchief. There would be biscuits piled in a cloth-lined basket, a platter of beef and gravy, beans slow-cooked with onion and pepper, a pitcher of buttermilk sweating in the shade. The men would come in from the pasture, hats in hand, and wash at the basin by the porch. A child might run to meet a father, barefoot in the dust, and be swung high into the air with a laugh that carried clear across the yard. These were the bonds that grew in isolated country. With the nearest neighbor a day's ride away and the nearest town farther still, family meant everyone who sat at the table. The grandfather who remembered the trail before the railroad came, the hired hand who had wintered 3 seasons and was hired no longer but simply kin, the quiet cook whose stew recipe nobody could quite copy, the sister who could rope and ride as well as any brother. They shared the weather and the work, the loss and the laughter, and they knew each other the way the mountains know their own long shadows. As the afternoon wore on, the ranch slowed into its gentlest hour. Cattle drifted in the pasture, tails swishing at the slow gold flies. A dog lay sprawled in the shade of the porch, one ear twitching in some soft dream. Somewhere, a windmill turned, a lazy metal flower catching and letting go of the breeze, its wheel creaking out a lullaby that had been the song of the open range for as long as any living soul could recall. And then the supper hour, and the bunkhouse full. A kerosene lamp swung above the long table. Stew steamed in the bowls. Stories were told, not in the booming way of trail nights, but in the low, contented way of men who had nothing to prove and nowhere to be. An old hand would clean his pipe. A younger one would mend a tear in his jacket by lamplight. The fire in the stove would settle into embers. And outside, the prairie turned from gold to rose to deepest lavender, and the first star of the evening rose over the cottonwoods, quiet as a whispered blessing. And so, dear listener, we come to the closing of our long ride together, to the soft hour when the West itself began to lay down its saddle and rest. The open range did not end in a single day. It ended the way a fire ends, slowly, with the last glow of coal settling into ash, with the last shadow lengthening across the floorboards. One spring, a rancher rode out and found a line of slender posts marching across a meadow where no posts had been before. Between them ran a thin silver thread, bright as spider silk in the morning light, and he reined in his horse and studied it for a long, quiet while. Barbed wire, they called it. A small thing, a humble thing, and yet it would gently, patiently stitch the great quilt of the prairie into smaller and smaller squares, until the old long drives would find no path left to follow. The railroads came too, reaching farther each season like the roots of a great slow tree. Where once the cowboy had driven his herd for months beneath the wide and wandering sky, now the cattle could step aboard a wooden car and be carried east in a matter of days. The whistle of the locomotive replaced the lowing of cattle at the river crossing. The clatter of iron wheels replaced the soft thunder of hooves on dust. It was not a sad sound, Not exactly. It was only a different sound, the sound of a country growing into itself, the way a child grows out of a favorite coat. The cowboys watched all of this with quiet eyes. Some of them hung up their chaps and became farmers, tending orchards and small gardens, teaching their sons to read by kerosene light. Some drifted to the little towns that had sprung up along the rails and took work in the liveries, or the feed stores, or the modest saloons where a man could sit and remember. Some stayed on the shrinking ranches, still riding fence lines, still gentling young horses, still singing softly to the herd on cold nights. Only now the herd was smaller, and the pasture had edges, and the stars, though still lovely, seemed to shine down on a landscape that knew itself at last. And slowly, as the years drifted by like leaves on a slow river, the cowboy began to become something more than a man. He became a memory. He became a story told by grandfathers on summer porches, while the fireflies rose out of the grass. He became a figure in a dime novel, a face on a poster, a shape silhouetted in the doorway of the mind whenever anyone spoke the word West. His hat grew wider in the telling. His horse grew swifter. The sunset behind him grew more golden every year. But beneath all that gilding, the true cowboy remained just what he had always been. A tired rider at the end of a long day. A man who knew the smell of rain on sage. A soul who had learned, out there on the great green sea of grass, that the world is vast and gentle and strange, and that a person is very small, and that this smallness is not a sorrow but a kind of comfort, like being tucked beneath a quilt that is larger than the bed. So tonight, as you lie beneath your own quilt, let your thoughts drift one last time across that old and tender country. See the campfire burning low in a ring of smooth stones. See the coffee pot tipped on its side, empty now, the grounds cooling in the grass. See the horses standing hip-shod and drowsy, their tails swishing gently at nothing at all. See the bedrolls laid out in a soft half-circle, and the faces of the riders turned toward the embers, and the brims of their hats tilted low against the breath of the prairie wind. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote lifts its voice and lowers it again, more like a lullaby than a cry. The last ember folds itself into silver ash. The sky above is deep and crowded with stars, and a thin moon rests on the horizon like a silver spoon laid gently on a tablecloth. The open range is quiet now. The long drive is finished. The cattle are bedded down, and the riders are dreaming, and the night itself seems to pull a soft blanket up over the shoulders of the world. Sleep well, dear traveler. The fire will tend itself. The horses know the way home. And the Old West, with all its gold and dust and gentle courage, will be right here by the hearth, waiting whenever you wish to ride out once more. Good night.